You look at the news, and it seems like populism is just everywhere, right? All over the globe all at once. It feels kind of random, like some big political storm. But what if it's not random at all? The source material we're looking at today argues there's a really clear chain reaction going on. And you know where it starts? With the tech we use every single day. So let's get into it and see how this all connects.
Right, so this is the big question. Why now? And why everywhere? It's not just one or two places. We're talking about a massive global shift. And to really get to the bottom of it, the source says we can't just stick to politics. Nope, we have to rewind a bit and start with technology and economics.
And that brings us to the very first domino to fall in this whole chain reaction, the wealth gap. You know, the growing divide between the rich and, well, everyone else.
Okay, check out the key word here, inevitably. The argument is that this isn't an accident. In our current capitalist system, when technology speeds up like it has, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Sure, it creates a ton of new wealth, but that wealth doesn't just trickle down to everybody. It gushes toward a very specific group of people, the ones who are creating or have mastered that new technology.
And this is what they call the winner-take-all scenario. It's the engine driving that whole process. We're not just talking about some people getting a bit of a raise. No, it's way more extreme. A handful of winners get almost all the new wealth. Meanwhile, a huge portion of the population just can't keep up with how fast things are changing, and they get left in the dust.
And you can see how this plays out in the real world. I mean, just look at this timeline. Take Japan in the 80s. It was famously known as the 100 million middle-class society. Pretty much everyone was in the middle. But fast forward to today, that middle class has been completely hollowed out. Now society is split. You've got the rich on one side, the poor on the other, and not a whole lot of people left in between.
Okay, so if capitalism is what's causing this huge inequality problem, you might be asking, well, why on earth do we stick with it? That's a fair question, and it brings us to the next big point. There's a trade-off here, and it's pretty much unavoidable.
The source puts it in really stark terms when you compare capitalism and communism. Look, capitalism has its problems, for sure, especially with inequality. But it's also what lights a fire under entrepreneurs and innovators, which makes the entire economic pie bigger. Now, communism, it can give you equality, but it's often an equality of poverty. When you take away the motivation to get ahead, the whole pie just shrinks. And historically, it tends to create the perfect conditions for dictators to take over.
So, what's the takeaway here? It's that no system is perfect. They all have drawbacks. The idea, according to this analysis, isn't to chase some flawless utopia. It's about picking the system that actually grows the economy for everyone, which they argue is capitalism, and then being smart about managing its biggest, ugliest side effect, that massive wealth gap.
And this is where things get really interesting. That economic problem, the inequality, doesn't stay just economic for long. It bleeds into politics and creates a huge opening. Let's call it the populist opportunity. So on one side of the scale, you've got this small group of incredibly wealthy people. They have massive economic power, right? They're the ones who won the winner-take-all game.
But, and this is the absolute key to the whole thing, in a democracy, money isn't everything. Political power comes down to one person, one vote. And guess who makes up the majority of voters? The people who've been left behind. Their power isn't in their bank accounts, it's in the voting booth.
And this is where that political vacuum opens right up. For a long time, the traditional parties, both left and right, have started to sound, well, kind of the same to a lot of people. So this massive group of voters who are struggling, they feel completely ignored. They look at the options and think, nobody's fighting for me. And nature, and politics, abhors a vacuum. So who jumps into that empty space? Populists. And they don't come empty-handed. They show up with a playbook that is simple, powerful, and incredibly effective. Let's call it the blame game playbook. At the heart of this playbook is one core tactic: scapegoating. It's so powerful. Instead of getting bogged down in complicated economic policies, you do something much simpler. You find an outside group, an other, and you blame them for everything that's wrong. It cuts through the noise and points all that frustration and anger in one simple outward direction. And the pitch is just brutally effective. Step 1, you find that huge group of people who feel left behind. Step 2, you give them a simple explanation for their pain. It's not your fault, it's them. And step 3, you offer a simple solution. If we just get rid of them, everything will be great again. It's a powerful narrative. You know, it's wild. When you look at populist movements all over the world, you see this exact same playbook again and again. The policies are just so similar.
Whether it's cracking down on immigration, starting trade wars with tariffs, pulling out of global agreements, the theme is always the same. It's about building walls, both literal and figurative, and pushing the other out.
So, this strategy? It clearly works for winning elections. No question about it. But what happens next? What are the long-term costs for a country that actually follows this path? Well, it all starts with the central promise, which is just so tempting. The message is, you are not at fault. It basically tells people, you're a victim, and none of this is on you. And let's be honest, that's a really comforting thing to hear. But that comfort comes with a very, very high price tag.
Think about it. If you're told over and over that none of your problems are your fault, what's your motivation to fix them? Why would you go back to school or learn a new skill or try to adapt if the real problem is just them? It slowly chips away at that personal drive, the self-effort that's essential for anyone and any country to succeed.
And this quote from the source just hits the nail on the head. It calls this a suicidal action. Why? Because this whole mentality is like poison to that entrepreneurial spirit we talked about earlier. You know, the engine that actually drives a capitalist economy. When a country gets caught up in blaming outsiders, it's essentially choking off its own ability to innovate and grow.
And the damage isn't just about the economy. This blame game culture creates deep, painful divisions in society. It pits neighbor against neighbor. And when a country is basically at war with itself, how can you possibly expect to have any kind of stable, long-term economic growth? It just doesn't happen. And here's the bottom line. For populist movements, the long-term health of the country often takes a back seat. The #1 goal is winning the next election. It's all about the short-term win. If the policies they push lead to a slow decline 10 or 20 years from now, well, that's someone else's problem.
All right, so let's just quickly recap that whole chain reaction. You got tech speeding up, which makes the wealth gap wider and wider, which creates this huge block of unhappy voters who feel like the mainstream parties have forgotten them. That creates the perfect opening for populists who swoop in with a simple blame game to win power. And the scary part, as the source points out, is that this is a cycle that is really, really hard to break.
Which brings us to the big final question. The source calls this trend difficult to reverse. So, what happens next? If technology is only going to get faster and this whole cycle is as powerful as it seems, what does the future look like? What happens when this political storm just keeps gaining strength? And that's the tough question this whole analysis leaves us with.